Today we're continuing Unit 2, which is multi-step equations and inequalities, by talking about absolute value equations. The steps to solving absolute value equations are as follows. Step number 1 is to make sure the absolute value expression is isolated. Step number 2 is to set the inside equal to both positive and negative numbers from the other side of the equation. Step number 3 is to solve both equations. Step number 4 is to write your answer as a solution set. Numbers 1 and 2 in your notes pack are the basic versions of absolute value equations. We know that there are two numbers, based on what we know about absolute value equations, that can give us an answer of a positive 2. That is, a negative 2 and a positive 2. We also know that for the second problem that we can use a positive 14 and a negative 14. If you substitute those both in for x, what we'll find is that our absolute value of a positive 14 and negative 14 will also give us a positive 14. Pause the video and write down your answers for number 3 and 4. Problem number 6 requires us to go back to step number 2. Step number 2 says that we set the inside equal to both positive and negative numbers from the other side of the equation. In this case, it will look like this. We'll have a negative 7a is equal to a positive 28, and a negative 7a is equal to a negative 28. After we set that up, we move on to step number 3. We divide by a negative 7 on both sides. This is solving the equation. So we have an a is equal to negative 4. On the other side, we divide by a negative 7, and we end up with a is equal to a positive 4. We write our answer as a solution set, which is step number 4. So a is equal to a positive 4 and a negative 4. If you want to guarantee that you have the correct answer, make sure that you substitute your answers back into your problem. So we will have the absolute value of a negative 7 times 4 is equal to 28. When we solve this out, we'll have the absolute value of a negative 28 is equal to 28. We know that absolute value is the distance a number is from 0, so that answer checks out. We can do the same thing with our other answer. We have the absolute value of a negative 7 times negative 4 is equal to 28. Negative 7 times a negative 4 gives us an absolute value of a positive 28 is equal to 28. Again, we find that our answer checks out. Pause the video and try to do number 5 on your notes. Problem number 8 looks a little bit different. Again, we notice that our absolute value is already isolated, so step number 1 is complete. So we move to step number 2, which says that we set it equal to both the positive and negative versions of our number that's on the right side of our equal sign. So we're going to have w minus 3 is equal to a positive 4, and w minus 3 is equal to a negative 4. The steps to solving equations take us to our answer. We add 3, canceling out our 3's, we'll have w is equal to 7. We add 3 on the second, canceling out our 3's, and w is equal to a negative 1. Write your answer as a solution set, and double check to make sure that your answers are correct by substituting those two answers back into your problem. Pause the video and do number 7. Problem number 12 gets a little more tricky. Our absolute value, as we notice, is already isolated. So we move to step number 2, and we set our equation equal to both the positive and negative answers. Negative 2v minus 5 is equal to a positive 17, and negative 2v minus 5 is equal to a negative 17. We go through our steps for solving equations. We add 5 to both sides first. Canceling out our 5's, we're left with negative 2v is equal to a positive 22. Divide by negative 2 on both sides, and we get v is equal to a negative 11. On the other equation, we add 5, again following the same steps. The 5's cancel, leaving us with negative 2v is equal to a negative 12. We divide by a negative 2 on both sides, and we get that v is equal to a positive 6. We write our answer as a solution set. V is equal to negative 11, and a positive 6. Again, make sure that you go back and substitute your answers to make sure that it checks out. Now, pause the video and try number 9. Problem number 14 is going to require us to go back to step number 1. Step number 1 says that we need to isolate our absolute value. We do that in this problem by first dividing by a negative 2. When we divide by a negative 2, we'll end up with the absolute value of z minus 3 is equal to a positive 7. At that point, we know that we set up our two equations. Z minus 3 is equal to a positive 7, and z minus 3 is equal to a negative 7. We solve it the same as our other equations. We add 3 first, canceling out our 3, and we'll have that z is equal to 10. The other problem, we add 3, and we end up with z is equal to a negative 4. We write our answer as a solution set. Z is equal to a positive 10 and a negative 4. Again, substitute both answers back in to double check and make sure that they check out. Otherwise, pause your video and work on problems number 15 and 16. Problem number 16 is a little bit different in that it requires us an additional step. We're still on step number 1 for solving absolute value equations, but we have to follow our steps for solving equations to isolate our absolute value. The first step is going to be to add 3 to both sides. That cancels out my 3's, leaving me with a negative 10 times the absolute value of h plus 5 is equal to a negative 80. I then divide on both sides by a negative 10, and what I'll be left with is the absolute value of h plus 5 is equal to a positive 8. Once I get to this point, I'm going to go back to step number 2, which says that I set my equations equal to both positive and negative version. So I'm going to have the absolute value of h plus 5 is equal to 8, and I'm going to write my two equations. H plus 5 is equal to positive 8, and h plus 5 is equal to a negative 8. In both equations, I'm going to solve it so that I get my answers. Subtract 5 first, leaving me with h is equal to 3, and then I subtract 5 on the other, and that'll leave me with h is equal to a negative 13. Write your answers as a solution set, 5 and negative 13. Make sure to substitute them back in and double check your work. Otherwise, you can pause your video and go ahead and try number 17 and 18. This concludes our video. As always, if you have any questions, make sure that you either email me or ask me as soon as class starts the next day. I'll be happy to answer them. If you like these videos, make sure that you let me know, because I think this is the way that we're going to approach the rest of our year.